Right. Oh, is that right? Is that the right colour? Welcome, everybody. This is the Cabinet meeting for Broadland District Council, and I welcome you all here. If you've all got your agendas ready, I will just make a start. It is being live streamed, as usual, on our YouTube channel, so do tune in. I'll make a start with item 1, which is declarations of interest. Does anybody have anything to declare? No. Apologies for absence. Do you have any apologies, James? Well, there is just one from Councillor Beadle. Right, so if we move to the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 5th of November, could I refer you to page 7? Does anybody have any comments they want to make on those papers? Any comments on the papers? No? Okay, thank you. So in that case, we can take them as correct and agreed, can we? Lovely, thank you very much. And then I will move you on then to public speaking. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
There's no public speaking.
Thank you. In that case, I will take us to the chairman of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Perhaps you would like to give us the feedback from your meeting.
Thank you. There's 3 points. I think perhaps Fran might want to even expand on some of them, so I don't want to steal his thunder to some extent. But there were 3 things which we particularly had a little bit of discussion around, despite the fact that everything was agreed. There was a question put about the under the medium-term financial plan. There was a query raised about the descriptions of the 2 listings of Broadland growth, reserves, i.e. should the 5 million budget. So we can get to that, right, thank you. So that was that query, which we raised. The risk register, I think particular point made here by Martin that the risk appears to be sat in a different place from who is responsible for the risk, but there's a financial risk, so it seems to be like blaming the football manager for the result of the chairman parking his car wrong. You know, it's like so. Okay, and the other issue was the thin nature of the report on the cleaning services. We felt that that could have been shared with us, even in pink papers, if there was anything financially concerning that needed to be shared with members. But it's just nice to know how we got to a result, not just be given the result.
Right, okay, so I can take that one first as well, is that we won't be considering that tonight on the same basis that members of the Cabinet also felt that was a bit light on detail, and we are asking for some extra information to go in that, and it will be coming back with that explanation within it. That is a comment that had been made before as well. So thank you for that. I think that's interesting that we've both said the same thing there. All right, is that all right? Thank you. So, non-cabinet members, anybody have anything they would like to add?
Thank you.
And that, oh, sorry.
It's usual. I just wanted to come on now. No, it won't go off now. As you alluded to, on the risk management report, we were really pleased to see that the nutrient neutrality had come back onto there, and the understanding around risk and management of risk. So, and separating the two, which some people at scrutiny didn't quite get right. But I'm glad we're seeing that there. I did raise it at the previous meeting when we were looking around the nutrient neutrality fund and taking the money into the feasibility study around the detail behind what's actually happening with the nutrient neutrality fund and the monies that were coming forward. And I note again that we are just stating that the money received on there is the 2 million that has been spent, which is great to see. No details around the number of credits that's released or anything else like that. And there is a commitment to try and spend the additional 7 million. But again, no plan as to when, how and why. We know that it's, again, around the septic tanks and everything. But again, it's just the phasing and everything else. So we asked for a detailed report and also the areas and the number of houses that it was going to release, and we still haven't got that information.
I think I can probably answer that for you, because I think what we need to bear in mind with the mitigation fund is that it is across several councils, so it's not just Broadland. So we have the venture company, which is also shared by several councils who've invested in that. We also have the mitigation fund monies, which come in and are managed by a group of councillors who represent each of those councils. There's a lot of information that comes through to that group, which is also available, I think you'll find, on a website. And I can't remember exactly the detail of the website, but I can get it forwarded to you. But there is a lot of stuff that's in there that explains a lot of how that works. So I think the point I would make is individual councils won't necessarily get all that full information, because it will be coming back through the Nutrient Mitigation Fund, and that information is available, and I will try to ensure that you get sight of that. Is that all right? That should be, I think, answer the question. Yeah. Okay then, in that case, can I move us on to the first item, which is item 7, and it's the medium-term financial position and reserves update. Rodney.
Thank you, Chair. It's good practice to occasionally review the medium-term financial position and also the reserves, and this report does this. And it's a good time to do this just before we get into the detailed budget setting reports, which you're coming back to yourselves in February of next year to set next year's budgets. The report very much sets out that, in common with most authorities, we are potentially seeing a future funding gap between the amount we would like to spend on services and the amount of income we get through our government grants and potential council tax. We've been in this position before, and we continue to deliver efficiencies to try and bridge that budget gap, but we just need to be aware we need to continue looking for efficiencies to actually make sure we can set a balanced budget in the longer term. There are some significant variabilities in our future funding estimates, and this year we've taken the opportunity to actually model what we call a realistic business case, but also a optimistic case and the worst case, because actually there are some significant unknowns. For instance, there's potential for significant costs if homelessness pressures keep increasing significantly, and indeed if government funding was to change significantly, we could easily see some significant budget cuts approaching in the future. The report also sets out your usable reserves. So as at the 31st of March, the Council had £23 million worth of reserves, which is at a healthy starting point, but obviously we have already committed to spend a significant proportion of these on our capital programme, so we just need to be aware of that looking forward. With regard to the detailed reserves, the suggestion is that Cabinet may wish to repurpose the COVID response reserve. As the country is now sort of coping with COVID, it's probably no longer necessary to keep a specific reserve for this purpose, and it could be returned to the general fund. And it's also probably appropriate to start looking at the opportunities reserve. This was money set aside a couple of years ago. It's probably a good time to look at this and start saying, is it all now going to be used, or is there any opportunity to review what's being spent out of that opportunities reserve? The paper also sets out the off-log financial metrics. In general, there's the financial metrics for Broadland are in line with or better than average, and there's no early signs of financial stress for the authority. But it is probably worthy of note that our core spending power per dwelling is actually one of the lowest in the country. And essentially that means our ability to generate income from sort of government grants and council tax is one of the lowest per dwelling, which obviously will constrain our ability to deliver extra services to our residents. That was all I was going to say on the report, but it's probably just worthwhile updating members. Actually, since this paper was produced, we have had the local government finance policy paper been issued by central government, and that was issued on the 28th of November. So this very much sets out their preliminary thoughts about what's actually going to be announced in the provisional finance settlement just before Christmas. And the key announcements being made are that no council will see a cash reduction in their core spending power. So the central government isn't guaranteeing that we'll see an increase in our spending power, but they are at least guaranteeing that we won't see a reduction in our spending power. But they've also said that all small councils will see a sort of real increase in their funding. Whether there will be one of those that will see an increase or not, we'll have to see. Thank you. Is that better? They've also announced very much that they're looking to do a full review of our spending announcement of the funding over the coming years. So actually for 25-26 they are looking to move to a multi-year funding settlement and potentially reviewing the current sort of settlement allocations. So very much we are looking at potential changes on the medium term of the funding settlements, and I've seemed to announce that there's going to be more targeted funding at those councils with a higher level of deprivation, which may of course not be Broadland. So there is potential significant change on the horizon. But in the short term, the budgets for next year are looking in a good position, and open for questions on the report. Thank you.
Wrong button. Well, thank you, Rodney. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Yeah, really observations on the report, Chair, and as you know, there is significant cost pressures on the council, and in terms of revenue, but also in terms of commitments around the capital spend as well. As you can see, Rodney's already mentioned here in the report about, we've got 23,000 as a good starting point. However, I think we just need to reiterate, and I did watch ONS as well, and then there was a comment about, well, that's great. However, the other side of that coin is 23 million, a large part of that is already committed to on previous commitments for that 23. So the pressures on the capital budget are still significant, and they still need to be addressed really over the next couple of years in a significant way. There's also significant pressures on the council in terms of its homeless situation, as you know, and there's a potential increase there, and maybe even more so than what we can currently see at the moment. All councils are experiencing this across the country. So again, that's another increase we could see, and we need to continue to monitor that. And also, hopefully, we will have some more LAHF funding, but it's not clear from government whether that will be available or not. I did note that on the Sunday East Politic programme that's on, that actually came up on that programme as well, that district councils should be using, hoping that we'll get more LAHF funding, because that can help to alleviate the homeless situation, obviously. But another significant pressure on the council, which is really significant, is 1.8 on page 14. It's therefore important to continue to seek efficiencies and plan various potential financial scenarios, so I've just been referring to, and the report refers to, as paid a significant proportion of overall costs. Efficiencies will need to be actively considered to reduce the overall pay bill, and this is something we are going to have to give attention to, Chair, as a Cabinet and Council in the near and foreseeable future, because those costs are significant and do affect our core spending power as well, of course. So really highlighting those points. In relation to the recommendations, we've got good explanation around the issues around COVID, why it's now appropriate to close that fund and push those funds through to general reserves, which again we need to do in terms of the capital spend in the pool that will occur on general reserves over the next 2 to 3 years. But also 3, the recommendation, Cabinet's review use of opportunity reserve, review to returning any uncommitted sums to general. As Rodney said, it is a good opportunity to look at that now. The reserve was set up some time ago. At this stage, I have not been able to go through this in any great detail in terms of examining that and seeing what potential is for funds from that particular reserve. So this is why this is here. I've actually got an alternative form of wording to 3, which just in a precision way explains that we need to examine it more and that the Cabinet really needs to review it. So I have a proposal around this, Chair, which I'll read out. So basically we would delete 3 as it's currently written and replace that with finance portfolio holder to examine and Cabinet to review the use of the Opportunities Reserve with a view to returning part of or all remaining sums to the general fund. We can't actually really say up front what we will do at the moment because I need to really examine that and bring the detail of that in terms of iterating it back through to the Cabinet, and then we can make the appropriate decisions at that time. But this form of wording is what I'm proposing, and I don't know if you want me to pass it down to you and the Minister Secretary. I'd like to pass my scrap piece of paper down.
Thank you for that. I think it doesn't actually say, does it, in the papers, what those projects. It says a range of projects, I believe, doesn't it? So I think that's the point, is we need to know what those projects are and whether those are still coming forward or whether those are things we still would want to do. So that's fine. I would be happy with that. Does anybody else have any other comments they want to make? I would just like to refer to page 17, which is the bit with the Broadland Growth Reserve on it. I think the point I would want to make about that is, because I asked a similar question, but basically this was the balance at 31st of March 2024. Those monies were in the Broadland Growth Reserve. That's where they are stored. What it's used for, the agreed property purchases, obviously was the LAF properties that we purchased, which is what the 1.7 million is for. The other one, which is to fund projects to encourage economic growth within the district, I think that's the bit that's slightly confusing, but I have to say I think housing and purchase of housing or development of housing, that is a form of economic growth and house building, and I think that's really intended to describe that. I'm not sure, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, any officer, but I think possibly South Norfolk are economic growth and planning, aren't they? I don't know whether that's got any bearing on it, but I think the terminology used is slightly confusing for Broadland, so it might be that we might want to rephrase it. But I think we all understand the principle about what the money is set aside for in that reserve. I think that should explain the points that were raised.
I agree that I think that useful is quite an old term when it was originally set up probably many years ago, so it would be appropriate for Cabinet to potentially change the wording of that for what they now see it being used for.
Okay, thank you. I hope that explains to everybody who had any comments on that one. Anything else we want to raise on this paper? No, okay. In that case, then, can I take us to the recommendations, which are as reported, as you'll see in the papers, except for number 3, and I will repeat them again just to be clear. So item 1, recommendation 1, is Cabinet to endorse the latest version of the medium-term financial projections. 2 is Cabinet to agree to close the COVID reserve, with the balance being transferred into the general reserve. And 3 will now read Finance Portfolio Holder to examine and Cabinet to review use of the Opportunities Reserve with a view to returning part of or all remaining sums to the General Fund. Okay? Right, thank you very much. Okay. Okay, so that moves us to item 8. Is that Rodney as well? Oh, it's Darren. Sorry, Darren. I haven't got to that page yet.
Thank you, Chair. This report is an overview of the Council's financial position at the end of September, Q2 for revenue and for capital. Just got a few key points to highlight. So at the end of September overall, we're predicting a total adverse variance against the cost of services of £138,000 against an overall budget of 14 million. Some areas are performing favourably against the budget, while others are facing significant inflationary cost demand pressures. However, the total position is offset by higher than budgeted for levels of investment income due to having increased cash balances and higher interest rates than expected, which has led to a predicted and transfer of funds to the General Fund at the end of the year of £323,000. At the end of September, the Council has spent £8.9 million on capital schemes, with an expected forecast spend by the end of the year of 18.3 million. The appendix of the report details the different variances for the cost of services across the whole Council. And if you've got any questions on those details, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thanks, Darren. Anybody got anything they would like to say about that? Steve, do you have an update of any sort?
Chair, the excuse me, report is very, very factual actually. And it's a statement of facts as things are. So on that basis, I wouldn't have anything to add to it really, Chair.
Anybody else? Comments to make?
Steve,
Thank you, Darren. That was very useful, and obviously we are simply moving on from there. I think the recommendation is simply to endorse the revenue and capital position, and I think we can all safely say we have done that. Thank you very much. So, Treasury Management Report. That's Georgina, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. This report gives an overview of the Council's Treasury position at the Q2 point. Interest earned has started decreasing over the last few months of Q2 as rates are decreasing and those investments previously invested have matured with the new deals coming back with lower rates. Rates for investments have been as high as 5.2% and recently have been around 4.5%. Link expect the bank rate to decrease to 3.75% by March 2026 and a further reduction to 3.5% by December 2026. Income derived from a combination of payments from maturing fixed-term investments and returns from liquid cash balances. No borrowing has been required to date in 24-25. The report includes performance against prudential indicators of which there have been no breaches. The report also includes a summarised update from our Treasury Advisors Link. I'd just like to note paragraph 3 refers to the latest bank rate change being in August 2024. However, this wasn't updated after the bank rate change in November. In paragraph 6.6, there is a table showing Link's most up-to-date forecast. I'm happy to take any questions anyone may have. Thank you.
Any questions, anybody, or comments you'd like to make? No, I think that all looks pretty straightforward. It's interesting that rates maybe are not falling quite as much as we might have thought, which is a good and a bad thing, doesn't it? Depend on where you're sitting. For us, quite good at the moment. So thank you very much. I think all the investments have been made within those requirements that we've asked for in the past. So I think we're confident that we've got sustainable investments for the future and in those funds in which we are happy to invest. So thank you very much. Okay.
Excuse me. There's a question that was asked at ONS around one of the investment funds, one we've had for a long time. Excuse me. I know what we're doing with that, but the rest of the cabinet, I think it would be very good if you could also just point that out to the rest of the cabinet as well, because you are reviewing that. You've recently had the managers in, I believe. Could you just iterate that for us?
Yeah, we recently had a meeting with the investment fund managers at 91 to discuss the progress that the fund has made. And we recently have moved 25% of the value of the fund into accumulation unit fund, because we are hoping that is going to boost the capital over the next few months, but we are going to have it under review and keep checking back with the manager to see how much progress that makes.
Sure, entirely appropriate. It's been there for quite some time and it did need a review, which we had previously discussed previously to ONS when I had our meetings. It's a very appropriate thing to do. Just one note on the interest rates. The interest rate fall has been delayed a bit. There's a number of factors around that. I won't bore everybody with the reasons why. However, you will see that interest rates are still due to drop. Time period that is slightly delayed. However, there is an upside to that in terms of our capital position, because once we move to the appropriate interest rate, then we can release sums via borrowing on the LHF properties, which means that we would then be able to bring into the council those capital sums when the rates drop. So there's an upside, there's a downside to it in terms of investment income coming in, but there is an upside to it in terms of some capital coming in once those interest rates drop.
Anybody else got any comments? No? Okay, in that case, I think we'll just go, we note, number one, we endorse the Treasury activity for the first half of the year and that it complies with the agreed strategy. Number two, note that the 24-25 prudential indicators for the first 6 months of the year. Okay. Which brings us to item 10. This is the one everybody gets so excited about, strategic performance and risk report. It's Corinne, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the report in front of you today is our quarterly strategic performance and risk report, and it provides the performance of our strategic indicators at the end of quarter two. Performance against target, we have 21 green indicators, 5 amber and 2 red. In terms of direction of travel, we have 15 moving in improving direction, 1 in a static, so remains the same or similar to the previous quarter, and 12 that are declining. Just taking the 2 red indicators this quarter where performance is declining, we have the number of working days taken to process new claims and change of circumstances for housing benefit and council tax benefit. You can see that the quarter 2 outturn is currently sitting at 37 days against a target of 7. There are a number of mitigating actions that are in place and the team have put in place to make sure that we bring this performance back on target by the end of the year. So prioritising the backlog and addressing those most sensitive claims to mitigate the level of impact. There's been lots of work into bolstering the resource that's available for processing and quickly reducing that backlog, funded by salary underspend and the use of agency and temporary resource, and equally the use of digital technology to reduce that backlog using automation where possible on simple tasks. The second red indicator is the customer satisfaction measure. You'll see quarter 2 outturn at 34.28% against a target of 65 and declining direction of travel. You'll note that the phone satisfaction remains high at 97%, whilst online performance tends to be the measure that's bringing down our overall average. We don't expect to see an increase in the next quarter related to customer satisfaction online, but it does outline a number of medium and long-term actions that are in place to address customer satisfaction, with the longer-term action being the customer experience platform, and medium to short-term actions being around the website phase 2 and the introduction of virtual agents. You'll note that there are only a small number of responses to the survey this quarter, so 317, and that's not largely reflective of our levels of customer demand that we handle down our contact channels. More work is being done to increase responses received. Some of that may mean more advanced tooling that and further investment that may be needed with the budgetary implication there. So I'm just going to pause there on the performance side before I move into risk for questions. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions?
Well, it's partly question, partly comment, really. And, you know, showing my age in terms of quoting an old soap opera, you know, I'm like Victor Meldrew, as far as the customer satisfaction measure goes, I don't believe it in terms of what we're actually seeing in terms of the percentages here. It does seem that we are kicking ourselves in our own kneecaps in terms of how the website is gathering that data at the moment. And it's really difficult to believe that such a low percentage of people actually accessing our channels are feeling satisfied with the outcomes that they're getting. We're not feeling that elsewhere in the organisation. It seems to be purely about how we're gathering the data. On a good point, it's, you know, someone who is kind of poacher's own gamekeeper in many respects and used to sit on the CEC committee for many years talking about customer satisfaction. It always used to be the phones that we would bash on about until quite recently, actually. Councillors across the political spectrum would complain about the sort of response that they're getting on the phones. And we're seeing numbers here that 97% satisfaction as far as the phones is concerned, which does seem to show that a corner has been turned. But I'm very keen to see that we start gathering data in a better way as far as the online channels is concerned, so that we don't give this bad reflection of Broadland in the future, that we're a council that people are not satisfied with, because that clearly isn't the case.
Thank you. I think that's always a bit of an issue, isn't it, with any of these sort of surveys and responses, that you either respond because you're cross and something hasn't worked, or you respond because you're really pleased with something that worked out really well. Otherwise, you just hang up, don't you? Don't put anything on the phone ones or go on the online. Trevor, you've got something you'd like to add?
Chair, if I can, only really to reinforce what the portfolio holder has just said in terms of where we're garnering our information from. It's such a narrow bandwidth that we're currently using compared to the number of customer interactions that we have with residents, that there is absolutely work in progress, not just to make sure we get a better resolution from our IT platform, but also that we're capturing customer feedback, residents' feedback from the plethora of customer interactions that we have to more accurately reflect exactly the points the portfolio holder is making. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, and to illustrate that really is just keeping things in perspective, because there was a comment at ONS around the waste and recycling dissatisfaction. So looking into that, it does reflect what Councillor Roper was saying around about how we collect the information and how it's then portrayed. So if we look at the dissatisfaction in terms of bin collections, we're talking about 30 odd amongst something like 2 million bin collections, and so you know, as a proportion, it's very, very small. But of course, it's that number of people who you know, we would want to satisfy, but it is actually quite a small number. So it's about keeping things in perspective.
Yeah, and I think that the point about that is maybe being able to show that perspective as well, not just, you know, the figures which might look high, but making clear how proportionate they might be as well, I think is a valid point.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding one of the red measures, the glasses on to see, it was about the time it took to process benefits. I've just had November's figures and it's looking very good. The work that's been put in by the team has really reduced the backlog, and if it carries on in this direction, then things are looking really good. So hopefully that will soon change from red. So thank you to the team for all of that.
News, Chair.
That's excellent. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's a good reason why it's worth monitoring those performance and looking at those risks, isn't it? So thank you. I'm very pleased to hear it. Anybody else got anything else they'd like to add on this point? I think the only other item I've got then is that at 2.16 there were 6 items that it was proposed to remove to the operational or de-escalated directorate risk registers, which I think we've already had a discussion about, and actually I don't think that those are ones we would want to de-escalate. I think we are, particularly the nutrient neutrality, I think is a real issue still, no matter how we haven't got to risk yet. I'm so sorry. I'll allow you to do risk first.
I think you did the hard work for me. So you'll notice in the risk report in front of you today, you've got tweaks to the risk register format to provide greater clarity on the risk cause effect and therefore the impact of any mitigation actions that are being put in place, and equally any proposed controls that are being requested and need Cabinet steer on, and how they are impacting the overall risk score. Table on page 90 indicates a number of changes, and really they are indicating where we split out the risk, cause and impact. They're not necessarily new risks that have been added to the risk register themselves. You'll note that the cybersecurity risk remains the biggest strategic threat and is outlined on the risk register with the proposed controls in place at F15. There are further controls anticipated to bring this back to the target threshold. Risks that have previously been de-escalated but have been reintroduced this quarter for Cabinet's review is BDC M3 related to fail to achieve the benefits from the collaboration, and BDC P1 the risk related to nutrient and neutrality. And just for Cabinet, there are 6 risks that are proposed for de-escalation. They're found at paragraph 2.16. Thank you.
I'll start again. So we're putting those other 2 back on the risk register. So maybe I've got slightly confused now. I think it was because Natasha mentioned risk and I've gone rushing off on it. But the 6 that are listed are, how do they relate to the 2 that you have just said are being restored?
So the 2 that are being restored will be, if Cabinet agree, will be shown on your strategic risk register and continue to be monitored and discussed at Cabinet every time the risk register comes through. The remaining 4 that you have on there relate to the central government financial settlement, and I think in terms of where we're at and knowing that those controls and mitigating risks and actions have now been included, and therefore that's bring that risk threshold back down to its target risk. The same with the national pay settlement, that's historic, so that is now no longer relevant, and the workforce transformation programme benefit realisation risks are now related to those risk scores meeting their target risk threshold.
Before I say anything, does anybody else have any other comments you want to make on those? Because I think my argument would again be that although I accept that the central government financial settlement, we've had some information on that, I still think there's no clarity on some of those things. Like, for example, the 20, we're still getting 1 year, aren't we, this year, and then it will move to 3. So for me, I still think that is still uncertain. So personally, I would still think that would merit staying on top of our agenda. And I know the national pay settlement we're talking about last year's has been agreed, but we still, obviously this is an ongoing thing, isn't it? We're going to have to go through another one every year. So there's still a part of me that's thinking, with this still the financial uncertainties of what the government might end up giving us, and given that pay is a substantial part of our expenditure, I would still suggest that's another one that probably ought to stay on. I don't know what everybody else thinks about this. I'm merely proposing these things, but I think they're things that we should still be monitoring at a strategic level. Although I accept what you're saying, there are some examples where you consider that perhaps they have dropped below a certain level. I still think those are things, in fact, I would probably go so far as to say all of those I would want to see remain on the strategic risk register, because I think they are all things that have a financial impact, and I think it's a good thing for the Cabinet and the Council as a whole to have a proper handle on that. And I worry that if we take them off the strategic risk register, we stop noticing those things sometimes. So for me, I would want to say that I would prefer to see those stay on there.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I would agree with you. As you know, part of my portfolio is audit. Audit function is actually, have we got the right processes and procedures in terms of risk? Well, we have, and we've just clarified them. It's very good work Corinne's just gone on in terms of re-clarifying how we look at those and the paperwork. I think ONS, there was a comment as well from one of the people that is also on the audit committee saying, welcome the change in that. That is welcome. But in terms of strategic risk, each year we have a pay settlement. So what we're talking about here is taking it off and putting it back on, which is just nonsensical. And if you look at the other categories, every single one of those potentially has a risk and financial. And where we are financially, I would totally agree with you, Chair. It makes sense to retain those on the strategic risks because they're unknown. A lot of what's going on there you cannot foresee at the moment, and then need constant monitoring.
Yes, and I mean, I accept that if you take them down to an operational level, they're still there. I think, though, for me, I consider that those are things that we should, at a strategic level, still be aware of, which is why I would want to. I would also like to add, though, I do think there's been a lot of work done on how we manage risk, and I would like to commend that work because I think it's been I'm much happier with the way we are actually recognising those and how we're recording them and scoring them now. I think it's much clearer. So that is really helpful and good. And in some ways, actually, that's probably why these things get highlighted, because suddenly we've got more information about them. But I think if you're okay with that, then I think we are saying that we would want to keep those on the strategic risk register.
Yeah, and I think the purpose of bringing them back to Cabinet and keeping them on there from a monitoring perspective is around, are there any further additional proposed controls that could be put in place that could further mitigate that risk, and having it on the risk register and centering it around that conversation can only be helpful.
I think it's precisely that, isn't it? If it's on here, we will go away and look to see if there's any other things that we can do in order to make sure we manage those and get those expectations right. So thank you, that would be really helpful.
And it is part of our work to do that, actually. So we must, in terms of our work, look at those risks, see what is going on in the council in terms of those, and then actually come forward with proposals to mitigate some of those or take action around some of those, if it's at all possible, on some of those risks. And there is some of them there we may be able to do that with in a more clearer way than others. Others are completely outside driven. Yeah. Thanks, Chair.
Are we all happy with that? Nobody else got anything else that they want to comment on regarding the risk register? No. In that case, can we take some recommendations, which are to endorse the 24-25 performance for Q2, to endorse the current position with respect to risk management, agree to the proposed controls, and to agree that, right, so item 3, we're not going to do item 3, so I'll just leave that one off. So it's item 1 and 2, yes. Is that right? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Chair, I didn't mean to say externally driven rather than outside driven.
Right, so that brings us on to the permanent pavement licensing regime. Thank you, Lee.
Good evening, everybody. The permanent payment licensing regime, it's something that Broadland Council initially put in place during the COVID pandemic as a temporary measure. It was introduced by the Business and Planning Act to streamline that process. Previously, it meant that we had to get planning permission, as well as a licence from Norfolk County Council Highways to be able to put tables and chairs outside catering, hospitality premises where eating and drinking could be taken place in those areas. The temporary provisions, the streamlined effect, was always intended to become a permanent arrangement. The value of seeing the streamlined way of doing that, helping businesses, the merit of that was well understood. And the new regime is looking to adopt what was there for temporary and then enhance that for the permanency of it. So they're looking at extending the consultation period and the determination of applications just to make it more workable. It was very, very fleet in terms of 7 days for consultation comments during COVID times, as temporary measures were changing all the while. So that's doubled to 14 days, and then 14 days for the council to make that decision to either grant or refuse. They've extended the annual licences to a 2-year duration. So again, that helps businesses as well, because they don't have to then do repeat applications. There's been a review of the fees and charges, and government have increased the cap fees and split it into 2 now, whereas before it was a £100 capped fee, maximum cap fee. Now they've introduced a £500 cap fee for a first-time application and a £350 fee for renewals. They've also introduced an enforcement regime to maintain public safety, and also introduced a level playing field for licence holders, where before, if you didn't apply for a licence, there were no tools to require that. Now they've adopted measures for allowing enforcement, so we can take action if somebody refuses to take a licensing approach. Our proposed fees are below the capped rates, and they've been calculated out on the same full cost recovery basis and methodology that was used for licensing fees and charges review that came before members in 2023. The Licensing and Regulatory Committee on the 15th of November have also looked at this report and made some recommendations that have been adopted and incorporated prior to it coming through overview and scrutiny and yourselves at Cabinet tonight. We've looked at the way that we want to do this, and the recommendations before you are to put in place a regime that looks at the fees, provision of a policy, as well as officer delegation to carry out that policy. Happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thanks very much, Lee. And no, I'd just like to endorse the policy and the fees, and just to comment on the detailed work in terms of working out the actual fees themselves. There is a capped amount of £500 for the initial application. I think what we've tried to do here is look at the accurate figures for just full cost recovery. You know, we want to be able to support and encourage our businesses. We don't want to overcharge, and what this does is to look at those full cost recovery costs, and that's exactly what we're trying to do here, is cover those costs, which is why the initial fee is £364.50, which is very precise. But of course, for any renewals, there are similar procedures one has to go through in terms of ensuring that everything is assessed properly, which is why it's the renewal is fairly close to the actual initial application as well. I think therefore it's quite a reasonable fees to go for, and the policy is very clear. The other aspect of this is that, of course, the licence is for initial 2-year period as well. It's so that initial fee is spread over 2 years as well. So I'd like to certainly fully support the officer recommendations and thank them for the work.
Anybody else? Yes, Steve.
Yeah, it's just picking up on Jane's point there. 4.2 on page 106. I was very pleased to read this part of the report. It reflects what Jane's just said in relation to the looking at the fees in a very detailed way in terms of cost recovery and not going beyond in terms of cap. I think in terms of principle, where we are policy chair as a cabinet, this actually reflects where we would be on this. I know that some councils may be somewhere else on it, but we are actually well and truly support a position where we're not overcharging, so to speak, or make money on this, because these are businesses, and we need to support the businesses in the best way we possibly can, and I believe this policy does. So, thank you, Chair. Is there something?
I don't know if everybody else can hear it, but all the microphones seem to be from time to time making a rather strange noise. You almost sound like you're.
And the weird thing is, when you're speaking, you're not picking it up. It's really strange.
Anyway, there we are. So there's some sort of ringing that's going on in the background, which is a bit weird. But anyway, hopefully you can still hear us. So just to be clear, I think that for me, the maximum capped fee for a new application is £500. Is that saying even if you did an annual licence, the capped fee would be at £500 per initially, and then £350 per year for people renewing? Is that what the figures mean? Because I guess where I'm trying to get to is, although we're saying £364.50 for the initial one and then £342.50 thereafter, they last for 2 years. So is that how that works, or have I misunderstood it?
Currently, it's a 1 year temporary payment licence that can be up to £100 capped. The new arrangements have put in maximum cap values, of which our fees are set below those capped amounts. There is a transitional arrangement for any existing licence holders. They will then move to the new regime once they get to their natural renewal, which will be in 2025. They will then switch to the renewal payment, and any first-time applicants that we receive from under the new regime, they will pay the 364 for the first year, and then it will be the lesser amount thereafter.
Great, thank you. That was what I'm just trying to work out where, because it's a transition, that's the issue, the odd thing that didn't seem, but that makes sense. Thank you. Anybody else got anything else they'd like to add? No. In that case, can I take us therefore to the recommendations, which we recommend to Council to adopt the proposed fees and charges of £364.50 for new applications and £342.50 for renewals, as proposed at paragraphs 4.2 Appendix 1. And we formally adopt the permanent pavement licensing regime and policy documentation at Appendix 2, and we delegate authority to the named officers and for the purposes provided at paragraph 4.3. Yes? Excellent. Thank you very much.
Agreed, Chair. I'd also just like to, as Jan did, I believe, just actually commend the officers, because there's actually a hell of a lot of work on there, which is really clear to see in the report. And I do notice this, Lee, as well. There's another report you did last year, and the detail in the reports, absolutely commend you. It's this kind of detail that we really appreciate. So that's much appreciated. Thank you.
Consider yourselves patted on the back. Thank you very much. Okay, so that brings us to item 12, which is the revision of the unreasonably persistent complainants policy.
Thank you, Chair. This policy has been updated in line with the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Guidance of April 2024. It's designed to handle a small number of complainants that act unreasonably, disrupting services, can place undue pressure on staff or drain resources. It provides a structured way to manage unreasonable or persistent complainants whilst ensuring fairness to complainants and protecting staff. It's essential that we apply this policy in line with sensitivity and in line with equality legislation. With our previous policy, it was decided that this wouldn't be published on our website. However, if a complainant were to escalate a decision to the local government and social care ombudsman, they wouldn't take that policy into consideration. So therefore, we're proposing that this policy is published alongside our complaints policy on our website. Within this policy, we've introduced a 3-stage process to give complainants a chance to amend their unreasonable behaviour. However, we recognise that this may not always be appropriate. And we have amended the decision point to restrict contact. Previously, that was made at CLT, but we've now amended this to be made by myself alongside the Assistant Director of the service area. But where contact may need to be restricted across a number of different services, this decision will be made by the Managing Director or an applicable substitute. And finally, we will have a central log of unreasonably persistent complainants so that we can monitor volumes and instances. And if members need to access that to check whether a resident has been identified as unreasonably persistent, that's something that can be facilitated through myself. I'll stop there for any questions. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Any questions? I think yours might be answered, but...
Oh, is it gone? Yes, thank you. You did actually answer one I was going to ask about making sure members are aware, because I think we discussed it before. In regard to categorising somebody as being persistent or unreasonable, and when you refer to complaints coming through the council, are you referring to official council channels, so they're emailing the council or they're calling the council rather than sending a complaint via their ward member? Because with the scattergun approach that's mentioned in here, they will often try all of these different channels, and if you're not aware that they're contacting various departments, but they're also contacting their ward member, perhaps all 3 ward members, perhaps a neighbouring ward member portfolio holder, maybe you're not getting the full picture. So that's one element of the sort of comment I was going to make. But also, if action is taken against anybody, we'd like to know, is it a case of we have to proactively ask, is there someone within our ward who we're dealing with, so we then don't waste time on them? Not that I wouldn't just deal with somebody, but you know, is it something where you will inform us? How does that process work? Thank you.
So I think with regards to the first comment around the scattergun approach, I think we recognise that members may be involved in the communications as well as officers, and so if restrict contact or put someone through that formal process, we would look at all channels that they might have been communicating with us on, including that ward member as well. In terms of access to that information, we suspect that it's going to be a small number because it's a small number at the moment. I think that yes, it would be that if that member was receiving a lot of contact from a particular resident, then they could come to myself to check whether we are aware. If we're not aware, then we can do some investigations to work out whether we need to then put the policy in place with that particular resident.
Come back on that. So, sorry for being boring and going on about it, but if it was just the other way, where the member didn't come forward because they were getting a lot of contact from somebody, but it was just officers who were dealing with somebody who was being vexatious or whatever, would you then proactively inform the member? So if that member then a resident contacts us about something, we're aware that they're likely, or that they are raising persistent problems.
Chairman, could I? I think those circumstances are very unlikely that we would proactively seek to inform a member if there were a persistent vexatious complainant on the basis of data protection. When a resident approaches a member on an issue, they normally give you consent to deal on their behalf. And if at that stage you engaged with the council and you would then be informed because you had licence to do that, we would not proactively come out to you, inform you of a resident within your ward for any particular reason. Thank you.
Yeah, I think to clarify my understanding of it is, you know, each councillor is effectively their own data protection officer. You have your own responsibilities. I think, I'm assuming the rest of us in this room do the same thing, those of us who are councillors. If you have somebody come to you with a complaint, obviously you bring it forward to the council. I'm assuming at that point you would then tell us if there was some an issue to do with a persistent complaint that, you know, this person wasn't doing. So I think it would have to work that way. Now that I've thought it through, I think that's the way round it should be, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And, you know, I agree with the explanation set out by the managing director there, and it seems entirely appropriate. In terms of the policy itself, I mean, I would certainly support the policy as set out for a number of reasons. It gives us a level of transparency that we didn't have before. It gives a straightforward process in stages that we didn't necessarily have before, with appropriate routes of escalation. It gives us a better level of corporate oversight over the whole process. And it also probably puts the decisions in the right place in the organisation as well, where perhaps previously they weren't. So I think this is a good step forward in terms of a policy, and should hopefully be effective in the very small number of cases that we have.
Yes, and I think publishing it, as you pointed out, if you don't publish it, then you're deemed almost not to have it, aren't you? So this is, you know, a perfectly reasonable thing to do. So am I happy then to take us all to the recommendation, which therefore is that we recommend that Council adopts the revised unreasonably persistent complainants policy for Broadland District Council? Agreed. Yes, lovely. Thank you. In that case, that brings us on to the whistleblowing policy update. Will that be you, Sinead? Dan? No.
Thank you, Chair. We don't have an officer presenting this today, but I'm happy just to introduce it as the portfolio holder. This is an annual review which has to take place of the whistleblowing policy. The main changes are outlined in 3.1 of the report, which is on page 132 of the papers, which outlines fairly minor tweaks which are happening in the policy this year, and the policy is as set out.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any comments? Questions? No? I think there was a point at which I believe somebody had noted that my telephone number is not on the paper as leader. I'm perfectly happy for my telephone number to be added to that, so if I will just liaise with Emma to get that put on. I don't think there's anything else to say about it then in that case, is there? So let's just go to the recommendation, which is that the Cabinet adopt the updated whistleblowing policy. Are we all happy to adopt that policy? Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to item 14, which actually we're not going to do at this meeting because I think we have had some concerns that it's a bit light on detail, and there have been some questions that have been raised within the Cabinet. There are also, I believe actually, it was also done at overview and scrutiny, so I think in that case we are probably expressing the same concerns and interest in the detail. So in that case, we won't consider that today, and we'll ask for that to be brought forward to a future Cabinet meeting, recognising that the contract needs to be in place by the 1st of March, I think it is. So I think we've got time to do that, but obviously we do appreciate that it needs to be done reasonably promptly. In that case, can I then take us to the forward plan? Does anybody have any comments they wish to make on the forward plan as it stands now with its updates, etc.? So we've all read it very thoroughly. Jolly good. That's what I like to hear. Nobody's got any. Yes, I think that will need to be just re-added temporarily. I'm hoping temporarily. Okay, so I think in that case then, if we're all happy to accept the forward plan as it stands, I don't think there's anything else we need to add on that one, which will actually mean that we can declare the meeting now closed. So thank you very much for attending. See you again soon.